Hello and welcome to Wrestling at Random. I'm Jeremy Deemer.
And I am Adam Summers, and you are here in Season 5. That's right, Season 5 of Wrestling at Random, where the theme is more wrestling, all caps, the randomizer packed to the brim. The bolts are shaking. They're flying off. Smoke is flying. Thousands upon thousands upon thousands of hours. I believe you said that there are more than 10,000 or 19,000 hours of wrestling.
Over 19,000 entries
Into the randomizer, and most
into the randomizer
are longer than an hour. Some are 3 hours. So we're probably at 40 to 50,000 hours of pro wrestling that has been dumped into the randomizer for Season 5.
That's right. If you're new to the podcast, that's how this works. We dumped all of the wrestling's content from the internet into the randomizer. We fire the randomizer up every single week. It will pick a show at random for us to watch. Could be from any territory, from any time. It could be a weekly TV show, could be a pay-per-view. And boy, oh boy, has the randomizer done us a solid here.
It's
no, it
taken us back
It's done this before. This is not a new territory for us.
One of the most infamous episodes of the free feed of this podcast in an earlier season was a review of NWA TNA weekly pay-per-view. I believe it was number 8.
Number 8, yeah.
Because then we got number 7 later on in the bonus feed. But NWA TNA weekly pay-per-view number 8, which had the Dup Cup, one of the worst segments in a major mainstream wrestling show in history.
In wrestling history. Think about all the content I just told you is in the randomizer. This is the worst segment in one of the worst segments in wrestling history. We reviewed it.
It's not hyperbole. We are not getting over our skis when we say that. It is 100% legitimately the worst segment in pro wrestling history. And as you said, you can go back and listen to that episode and all the others here in the free feed. This week, the randomizer chose NWA TNA weekly pay-per-view number 36. And as the show gets started...
Wait, I'm not ready to get started yet.
Oh.
Because, first of all, if you're watching the podcast on our YouTube channel, if you're not, throw us a subscription over there. Search Wrestling at Random Podcast on YouTube and throw us a subscribe. Helps us work the algorithm so other people can find us. But if you're watching us do this podcast there, you'll see that I had to break out the brown liquor to get me through this review and this show. It's not as bad. There's nothing on here as bad as the Dup Cup or pay-per-view number 8. But still, it is a night where I need Weller Special Reserve to help me get through this recap, because we're talking about the year 2003. This is March 13th of 2003. Do you know what's going on in March of 2003 over in New York?
Tell me.
WrestleMania 19, which we also reviewed here in the free feed. You can listen to parts 1 and 2 of WrestleMania 19. I was in attendance in Seattle, Washington for that show, and we reviewed it here. So the WWE is putting out Hogan and Vince McMahon, Jericho versus Shawn Michaels, Brock Lesnar and Kurt Angle. Just to put in context of what so then you go to what's the number 2 wrestling company is doing? This show. They're doing this show. It's light years away from, it was with this roster, with this stories, it was never going to be a thing.
No, and there's never been a bigger chasm between the presentation, the success, and I'm not the biggest WWE or WWF fan, but the presentation and success of the number 1 company in the United States and what the de facto number 2 company was at this point, NWA TNA Wrestling. This show is in Nashville at the Asylum. It is a very lo-fi look, even though it's well lit.
The show had 700 paid, which was actually more than double the 350 paid that they'd been getting the weeks prior to this show. So this is TNA on a hot streak, by the way.
Yes, and the announcers were hyped. They couldn't stop telling us how they had to turn away people hours before the show. So this was, in some ways, a watershed moment for TNA at the Asylum. The show, if we're ready to talk about the show itself, because I know we could talk for hours about TNA, the promotion.
We should recap and let people know that these were weekly pay-per-views. So they did not have a television show on television.
Well, this was a weekly their television show. They were weekly, I believe, $10 pay-per-views, $10 or $15. I got quite a few of them in the first year or so. Again, I was so starved for anything to fill my WCW and ECW void at that point, and I was a big fan of Low Key and Chris Daniels and AJ Styles, guys that I'd either seen or heard about on the indies. So I wanted to really support it. But yeah, there was no weekly TV to push the pay-per-views. The pay-per-views were the weekly show, and you had to buy them. They were 2 hours every Wednesday.
Pay-per-view buys were averaging in the range of 15,000 buys a week.
Which is actually, obviously it wasn't sustainable business-wise, but looking back on it, it's shocking they even got that many people for a sight unseen company that had never had TV and didn't have any other springboard that they were able to get 15,000 people to order. It wasn't enough, but it still is something.
Walk us through this show open.
So this show open, if you're wondering at what stage of NWA TNA Total Nonstop Action Wrestling we're in, we are in it is a Vince Russo morality play 24/7 when it's not a Jeff Jarrett morality play 24/7. We see repeating shots of Vince Russo looking sad from last week. He's sitting in his office talking about the price that he had to pay for his passion, says that he's done with the wrestling business and has to go back to his family. Apparently last week, Jeff Jarrett brought Vince Russo's kids, Will and DJ, to the Asylum last week to, in some way, shape, or form, humiliate or make Vince Russo sad. Jeff Jarrett's the baby face, by the way, in case you were wondering. Then here come Erik Watts and David Flair. Apparently, Erik Watts put Jeff Jarrett through a table last week because Jeff Jarrett didn't mention his name, meaning Erik Watts' name, during a discussion of the best second-generation wrestlers in the company. AJ Styles confronts Jeff Jarrett in the locker room.
Same video package opening the show, by the way. So the package did not end.
No, this is still video package. AJ Styles confronts Jeff Jarrett in the locker room, tries to hit him with a chair, but accidentally gets hit with a chair. It's all kind of crazy. We're back in the ring now. Brian Lawler hits a second rope leg drop. Then David Flair has the NWA title. Erik Watts attacks Jeff Jarrett with the baseball bat, and that's how last week's show closed.
And that's the end of the opening video package.
And to recap, the main story in the company on the pay-per-view last week, which is meant to hook you to spend your $9.99 of American legal tender currency that you had earned with your hard work. They left that show telling you that next week you will see the continuation or the conclusion of the Erik Watts, Brian Lawler, David Flair attack on attack on Jeff Jarrett. We could have used Ric Flair here. That was the hook to get you to pay for this show that we're about to watch.
Erik Watts in 2003. We were talking about Erik Watts in 1992.
We talked about Erik Watts in 92. We talked about him briefly in the WWF as part of Techno Team 2000. Then he came back to WCW, late stage WCW, dressing like the Lost Hardy Boy. And then here he is in 2003.
So the show actually opens, now that the video package is done, with the NWA World Heavyweight Champion Jeff Jarrett coming out. He's trying to kick open a door to the locker room where Vince Russo's gang is hanging out.
Yes, Vince Russo's gang, which is called SEX, Sports Entertainment Extreme. And if you ever wondered what Vince Russo's name would have been for TNA Wrestling if he had started the company. It would have been that.
So yeah, Sports Entertainment Extreme. So the group's name is not C, it's Sex, because Extreme. It's X hyphen whatever. So it's that, which is a very late 90s thing. I think that was done by 2003 that you were using the X, right?
Yeah, but I feel like, I mean, late 90s bled into the early 2000s. It's wrestling. This is Nashville.
It's extreme. It's extreme.
It's extreme. So, it was extreme. This was the X Games. This was Team Extreme. This was the XWF. This was that era. But yes, Sports Entertainment Extreme sucks. And they have this locker room, which again, like, it all comes across so low rent because this is just this old building, and their locker room is just this like half painted black door on the other side of the building. Like, it makes them look like total losers.
He couldn't find Erik Watts, so he ends up leaving. Conan comes out. We love Conan. He comes out. He calls out for his. So this is a recurring segment. Apparently, they have a lucha match every week, and so for this week, he calls out his team of Halloween and Damien Says.
Yes, we talk about guys dressed like the Hardy Boys. They're doing their best Hardy's impersonation. Conan, apparently this is part of he's the leader of the Luchador Invasion. And we should also note, we always talk about how terrible TNA's music is. That is on display throughout this show. There's no like marker of any of these music outside of Jeff Jarrett that would tell you like that it's for someone rather than someone else. Like, this Conan music is so generic.
No, the whole thing, yeah, the whole presentation is terrible. The music, such an important part of wrestling, and just a complete miss for almost the entirety of TNA.
Well, this is the actual music they chose. This is what was heard live when it happened. This is what's heard in the arena, and it's significantly worse than the dubbed fake music that WWE has to use on the network for anything they don't have the rights to. It's ridiculous that they chose this as the actual on-air music.
Their opponents, the team of Jerry Lynn and David Young. David Young is subbing for an ill Paul London.
Talk about a downgrade. David Young. One of these does not fit. Apparently, there was a rivalry between the X Division and the Luchadors. We don't know why. Conan goes to the commentary booth. He's saying things such as, his guys call it in the ring. Again, this is the weirdest thing. It's these Vince Russo shows where they're asking you to buy into the kayfabe storylines that are happening on the show while constantly, relentlessly never letting you forget that everything you're watching is fake. And this is a scripted booked entertainment show rather than a sporting competition. It's so jarring, whether it's, 2000 WCW or 2003 TNA.
We also get a line from Conan where he says, David Young sucks and he should be on Tough Enough. Won't be the last time we get a WWE, WWF reference throughout the show.
We got a great, I don't know if you caught this, and I don't know if Conan actually meant to do this. I would say he did, because Conan's a really smart guy. There's one point during the match after the worst giant swing you've ever seen by Damien and Halloween. Conan calls David Young David.
He did call him Young David.
I cracked. For those of you that listen over on our bonus feed on our Patreon, we've had several episodes focusing on World of Sport in the UK and England, where Young David, a teenage Davy Boy Smith, was featured. So I'd like to think maybe before this show in a hotel in Nashville, we had Conan watching some World of Sport tapes.
We get some. We did have some good double team moves from Damien and Halloween. The giant swing not being one of them. Young makes the hot tag to Jerry Lynn. Lynn sends Halloween out to the floor. He does a springboard dive. And then Conan hits David Young on the outside of the ring. While inside the ring, the team of Halloween and Damien are double teaming Jerry Lynn. Young he's injured by Conan's attack. He's carried to the back. Jerry Lynn on his own, gets a surprise roll-up with the flash pin and the victory. Konnan then hits the ring. He's pissed. He's smacking around the luchadors. Lynn confronts Konnan, but Konnan attacks Lynn from behind. Damian and Halloween end up pulling Konnan off of Jerry Lynn as this segment ends.
This wasn't very good. Jerry Lynn is always good. He's always super, super consistent. But I didn't think Damian or Halloween looked all that good. The story is stupid. And yeah, this at least it didn't last too long. We then go to the back. Goldilocks is with Erik Watts. She screams as Jeff Jarrett comes in and attacks Erik Watts. They get pulled apart by TNA security.
So Goldilocks, we've mentioned on the show before, like these early Goldilocks interview segments, she's tremendous at doing natural facial reactions to this stuff. It would eventually pretty quickly turn into like a parody of itself and like got too self-aware.
Even here.
So she was that was one of the highlights of her performance, was her ability to have good natural reactions, but you could already see it was sliding into a gimmick at this point.
Yes. It's weird to talk about Goldilocks at her best, but early on, it was actually a pretty striking contrast to the very stilted, never believable backstage interviewers in the WWE, even during this time period in 2003. After that, we have Erik Watts come out to the ring as Mike Tenay dramatically reads, unironically, all of Erik Watts' sporting accomplishments, including being the PWI Rookie of the Year. So he reads off all his high school and college football stuff, talks about him being the Rookie of the Year in the PWI, and then there's nothing for 11 years. The man accomplished nothing for 11 years until he walked into the asylum. He says he's in Jarrett's head. Jarrett runs out to the ring. They have a baseball bat battle before security comes out to keep them separated. And Don West, God love him, just the best here. He's screaming that someone may get killed here in this baseball bat battle.
So we've seen a lot of Erik Watts and Jeff Jarrett to begin this show, and we're just getting started.
Oh yeah.
Goldilocks is interviewing the X Division champion Kid Cash, and he gets confronted by Amazing Red, who is amazingly not a good promo.
He is not a good promo. He would have benefited here, like he did many, many years later, from having his number one fan, Don West, as his mouthpiece. Here he tries to cut a promo about getting an X Division title match, but this time Cash shouldn't hide behind his manager, Trinity. He should do it on his own. He then gets this video showing like military coups throughout the world, and saying that I'm no longer shackled after 5 years in this like MASH style font on the screen. And then D'Lo Brown comes out, and Mike Tenay and Don West are screaming at the top of their lungs, blowing out the speakers, and asking each other over and over again if they are down with the Brown. And hearing Mike Tenay and Don West say that over and over again, it was funny.
And it was a legit big time reaction. Like these people were not reacting to a lot yet on this show. They blew the roof off the dump for D'Lo Brown to tell you how much star power the rest of this roster had at this point.
What they were starved for.
Yeah, and D'Lo shows up here, and he goes to the ring, and we're told, who's he gonna shoot on?
Oh God, yeah, exactly. So again, it's very clear this is a Vince Russo show, and then he goes on to just talk about a bunch of backstage stuff. He's trying to sound confident, but he also seems pretty nervous. He said he was told he couldn't cut promos. He got sent down to their minor leagues, said he can teach them how to get over, but what, you don't think I can get over myself? He's talking about the glass ceiling and backstage politics.
It's like there's nothing that you want to hear less of on a pro wrestling show than them talking about Backstage politics and a glass ceiling. Get out of here.
It's the worst because when I'm watching
in another company.
Yes. That's the only that's worse than hearing about backstage politics and glass ceilings in the company is hearing a guy talk about it in the company he used to be in. I'm supposed to be able to suspend disbelief for the 2 hours I'm watching the show and believe that the guys who are winning because they're better than the other guys. If you're getting the title shot, it's because you earned it or it's whatever. Instead, it's just all that usual garbage until here comes Sonny Siaki emerging from the sex locker room.
The ace in the hole, Adam, Sonny Siaki. He introduces himself to D'Lo Brown. He wants D'Lo to join Sports Entertainment Extreme.
False. This is the first of many times that we get the double entendres with the group name. Again, this was just Vince Russo amusing himself, just like a lot of WWE stuff is Vince McMahon writing stuff or having stuff written just to pop himself. Here we have Sonny Siaki say, or we have D'Lo Brown say it back to him, the offer to join sex sounds good, but no thanks.
D'Lo isn't here to be in a group. He's on his own. D'Lo says no thanks. He brings up some racist WWE angle, and D'Lo cuts him off and hits a frog splash off the top.
It's worse that he talks. Sonny Siaki talks about the racist angle, then says, "I thought that was just a work, but the more you talk," and before he can finish the sentence, D'Lo hits him. So now we're talking about shoot, we're talking about glass ceilings, backstage politics, and we're openly talking about things being a work here on this wrestling show that is entirely a work.
Girls are dancing in bikinis inside cages near the entranceway. And then we get our X Division Championship match. And we're told, Adam, the X Division Championship is on the line in a 3-way dance. And then we're told first pin wins. This is not how a 3-way dance works.
No, a 3-way dance as it was in ECW, and that is the promotion of where that phrase came from. It is a 3-way elimination match. A 3-way non-elimination match, first pinfall is just a 3-way match.
Triple threat.
Or colloquially, a triple threat. So again, TNA not doing a great job here. That's fantastic though, compared to what happens next. Britain's own Johnny Storm comes out to what I would say is the worst entrance music I've ever heard in my life. That's not just like the Right to Censor's buzzer. It is the only way I can describe this is, and I was listening on headphones. It is a collection of dissonant sounds that don't make sense, that don't go together, that are vaguely like music, but not coming together to be that at all. Completely bizarre.
Johnny Storm taking on Amazing Red and the X Division champion Kid Cash. Everyone misses and counters stuff, and we get an indie standoff to start the match out. Storm hit a top rope Rana on Red. Red gets caught by Cash, who hits a powerbomb. The pin is broken up by Storm. We get a code Red right away for a 2 count. And then flatliner off the top by Red on Storm gets a 2 count. And I'm watching Amazing Red do tremendous things, and you have to stop for a second and say, this is 2003. Amazing Red was absolutely ahead of his time. He's like a modern wrestler transported into 2003.
Particularly when you see a guy like Johnny Storm or even Kid Cash, they're doing all the like junior heavyweight indie standoff stuff, but it's not as crisp as you see so many guys do it now. Amazing Red in 2003, it's a great point. He looks like a 2023
he does
guy in 2003. What also looks like something straight out of a wrestling show from this week is out of nowhere, Johnny Storm hitting a top rope poison Rana. That was much better than the top rope flatliner you talked about, which is got to be one of the dumbest moves I've ever seen.
Yes.
A top rope flatliner is you jumping off the top rope and taking a back bump with the full weight of your opponent falling on your body, and that is somehow supposed to hurt him more than you. Throw that on the cutting room floor. Keep the top rope poison Rana.
Yeah, top rope poison Rana. He's been watching his Japanese tapes, so we get that, and then we get Storm. He tries He tries one, doesn't get it all the way. Cash blocked it. We get a double underhook into a pile driver with the arms hooked. Kid Cash gets the pin. I can't remember what Kid Cash's dumb name is for that move, but he got the pin.
It's a running J driller, but I'm sure it had some. Everything was like a trailer. Everything that Kid Cash had, at least in ECW, they're all plays on Kid Rock song names, which is what the character was named after. I was too distracted by the fact that Kid Cash had basically the exact same blue long tights that Jerry Lynn had earlier, and they have the same build basically and similar features, particularly on a lo-fi release by this. Also, I was distracted by the long story that Mike Tenay and Don West went into about how last week's show got knocked off the air, but the great production crew was able to get them back and running within 4 minutes.
Which is still costs like 75 cents.
That's an eternity in actual live television, even more so when it's live television that people are paying for.
Yeah, so this Storm guy was a total zero, and I went and looked him up, and I'm like, man, this guy was nothing. What did he ever do? He ended up doing nothing, so it worked out.
Yeah, I remember him kicking around the indie scene, obviously in the UK and a little bit in the US, but yeah, it was Tenay hyped him up so much during the entrance of that horrible music. And then he was just kind of your generic early 2000s indie junior heavyweight. Some stuff looked good, some stuff looked bad, and like you said, he didn't amount to much.
Goldie is in the back with Sonny Sayaki. Mike Sanders is there. He punches Siaki, and then all of a sudden Disco Inferno shows up to break up this fight.
No, Glenn Gilberti.
And then we're told, yes, that he's not Disco Inferno. In fact, he's Glenn Gilberti.
Let's run down the list of people that are members of Sports Entertainment Extreme Sex here in this locker room. It is Mike Sanders, Sonny Siaki, Glenn Gilberti, Ron and Don Harris, Elix Skipper, Low-Key, and Christopher Daniels. What a crew of men.
And I'm pretty sure that we're told Raven's part of this group too at some point.
Yes, we'll see that later on in the show. He was not in the back. He was preparing for his main event #1 contender match against AJ Styles later on in the show. This segment is terrible, though. It's Disco Inferno as a borderline bully, serious, inspirational leader trying to fire up this group. Of course, we have more double entendres where Chris Daniels says, quote, "Don't question our commitment to sex," he says to the former Disco Inferno.
Yes, they are going to go for the tag titles later in the show. And I'm like, and that's when the Harris brothers emerged in this locker room. I'm like, what is this faction? Like, how are these guys all put together? And they're all like fighting for the honor of Vince Russo. Like, yes. That's like what Gilberti's speech was all about. Like, we're doing it for Russo. Like, this is so weird. The Harris brothers hit the ring. Their opponents, the team of Steve Corino and the Sandman, ECW's Sandman. What the hell am I watching? He comes out drinking beer, smoking a cigarette, doing his full Sandman entrance just without Enter Sandman.
And nowhere near as good of a knockoff as WWE has on the WWE network for the dubbed over ECW stuff. It's terribly generic. It's one of my biggest pet peeves when TNA or anyone would use ECW guys post ECW, and they would put like this: Sandman and Steve Corino together. They would never be together. It's like ECW the promotion was just one big faction of guys that would team together. I hate that. And I love Steve Corino. He was my favorite wrestler in the world during his world title reign, as the peak of his ECW run. Love me some Sandman. I hated seeing these two guys together here as just the generic ECW crew.
It got worse because the Harris brothers hit the H-bomb, double power bomb on Corino before Sandman even gets anywhere near the ring, and they get the pin. The brawl continued, and somehow Steve Corino's bleeding.
Yes. For those
hell?
who are younger, that's a John Moxley is bleeding joke. It's the same thing. Carino would always bleed. This brawl outside the ring through the crowd near the exit of the building went on way too long, and it was mostly dominated by the Harris brothers beating up the former ECW guys. The match was a travesty, the likes of which the wrestling world had not seen since Jimmy Valiant and Pez Whatley squashed the Road Warriors in Georgia in 1983. I was appalled. I definitely did not order this show live, because if I had, I would have remembered this, and I probably would have never watched TNA again.
Goldilocks is with Mike Sanders. Disco interrupts again. He's like, just because you're Kevin Nash's buddy doesn't mean a thing. Gilberti is the leader of this group, I'm figuring out. I don't know if Kevin Nash is actually in TNA at this point.
He's not. He's not. So, this was a way to make their own promotion look minor league, which they would always do, because Gilberti after that said, if you were really Kevin Nash's friend, he would have taken him with you.
So
we should mention again, Mike Sanders. This is above average Mike Sanders from the dying days of WCW. The Natural Born Thrillers group. He is here now as a centerpiece of this group in TNA.
Dusty Rhodes comes out for a promo. Like,
dude, most generic.
What a roster this TNA has.
TNA is like the Tenryu 6-man tags in War of wrestling promotions, except for the actual show sucks, unlike War. But it's just, it's always, whenever you watch these shows or you look at the full card on Cage Match, it's just mind-blowing that all these guys were in the same building at the same time and alive at the same time. Dusty Rhodes comes out to the worst, most generic country music instrumental you've ever had, or you've ever heard. And then he asks multiple times if there's a fracas going on.
He calls out David Flair, Brian Lawler, and Erik Watts. This went on way too long. The highlight was Dusty saying D's nuts and attacking them. D'Lo ends up making the save. Watts attacked Dusty. Flair and Lawler double teamed on D'Lo. Jeff Jarrett makes the save. So again, if you're playing a drinking game at home, taking a drink whenever Jeff Jarrett or Erik Watts appears on your TV, you're already hammered.
I believe this is the fourth time they've tried to get at it. And maybe if it was not Erik Watts and Jeff Jarrett, this would be a little bit more effective. It is a wild, though. Like, I'm not the biggest Brian Christopher, Brian Lawler fan, Grandmaster Sexay. We've talked about that before. It's not my cup of tea, but seeing him stand next to David Flair and Brian Lawler reacting to Dusty Rhodes making fun of him versus the non-reaction, just blank face of David Flair reacting to Dusty Rhodes tearing him down. Like, you talk about chasms in charisma between two men standing next to each other. That was on display here.
Goldilocks interviews Elix Skipper, Low-Key, and Christopher Daniels. They say that they are the true champions. They're going to win the tag titles.
We had a video package right before that about America's Most Wanted. James Storm and Chris Harris, who are actually a really good team and one of the few bright, non-X Division bright spots for me in TNA during this time. This video package isn't awful. It's better than WCW video packages, but it's a lot worse than WWF video packages, mostly because this like MIDI level music that's playing in the background that's so distracting.
But I want you to remember this video package. Because what they're doing is showing you why the tag titles are held up.
Yes. Oh, yes. I know where you're going.
We'll get there a little bit later when we talk about the tag team titles and beyond. So we go to the ring where Sex member Mike Sanders is in the ring to take on his opponent.
So stupid. This is so dumb. And it gets worse because Sanders gets on the mic and says, again, because we have to have double entendres that pop Vince Russo. Direct quote, "Sex is as tight as it's ever been," says Mike Sanders about the group Sports Entertainment Extreme.
His opponent is Hacksaw Jim Duggan in 2003.
Not only is it Hacksaw Jim Duggan in 2003, but you figure like, there's no way they can get Jim Duggan's music wrong, right? It's just it's like a public domain. Well, instead, They've got the Jim Duggan music, but it sounds like it's being played on a phonograph from 1823.
Just play a John Sousa march and you're good to go. And this is not hard.
This is
Here comes
like the
Jim
most
Duggan.
lo-fi single speaker AM radio version of this song as Jim Duggan comes out in black overalls with an American flag on them. If you are following us on social media, which why aren't you? But if you are, you will have seen the gif of the best moment on this show by far, as if there were ever two kindred spirits in the world, these would be the two. It is the night where Jim Duggan meets Don West at the announce table. So pure, so beautiful.
This match went way longer than you think it would.
Oh my God, this was not.
The finish comes when Sanders misses a middle rope moonsault. Duggan with a charging clothesline gets the pin. Duggan
Terrible
gets the pin.
Of course he does. It's Mike Sanders.
Glenn Gilberti hits the ring. They double team Duggan after the match. We see more girls dancing in a cage.
Well, I just have to say, Duggan is the smartest guy in the history of professional wrestling because he did, like we saw, he was great. Awesome, violent brawler in Mid-South. Once he gets to WWF, everything he did there, he could do for the rest of his natural life.
Absolutely.
He also does not look a day older here facially in 2003 than he did in like 1988 in the WWF. It's wild.
Goldilocks is with AJ Styles. AJ is provoking Raven by sitting in the Raven's nest.
He's provoking me by cutting this terrible promo with that high-pitched, squealy Southern drawl. My God, AJ Styles in 2003 is the reason that managers exist, yet he doesn't have one.
No, but wow, has he come a long way? I mean, he, even in his New Japan run, his WWE run, I never thought of him as just a horrendous promo, but here, horrendous, just not good at all.
No, not ready for prime time, pardon the pun, whatsoever. We have Raven come out, and then we have, because we haven't seen him enough times already tonight, we have the Harris brothers, Ron and Don Harris, holding Raven back because they don't want him to risk his number one contenders match later on. They don't want him to get hurt or get thrown out of that match, so they pull him away. We
see highlights of a tournament for these tag titles, and it involved the Rock and Roll Express. I was angry that they were not on this show.
A heel Rock and Roll Express. Ricky Morton and Robert Gibson, members of Sports Entertainment Extreme, sucks. This all happened because there was a double pin and a tag title match that involved Triple X, which was this is a subgroup of Sports Entertainment Extreme. Triple X, that being Erik Skipper, AJ Styles, and Christopher Daniels. It's a double pin involving them and Brian Lee and whoever the other guy was that was managed by Sinister Minister Father James Mitchell at this time. So the double pin leads to the belts being held up. It's a 4-team tournament of sorts where the winners of this tournament then go on to wrestle the former champions who should probably still be champions, that being the Triple X trio that has Freebird rules and wrestles as a duo.
We go back to live action. The vacant NWA Tag Team Championship. America's Most Wanted versus Triple X. This incarnation being Christopher Daniels and Low Key, Erik Skipper at ringside.
I'm hyped for this because, again, I really liked America's Most Wanted as a tag team. They got more out of the Naturals, Chase and Andy, than just about anyone could ever be expected to. Chase Douglas and Andy Douglas or whatever the hell they were.
Hey, that's more names than I know.
Yes.
This
Natural
blonde,
A
natural, brown-haired natural.
Yes. Natural A and Natural B. It's a shame that they didn't have a bald one, so we couldn't do natural bald and natural hair, as people like to do in modern times about another tag team. But yes, AMW against Christopher Daniels and Low Key. Considering everything we've sat throughout the show so far, I'm hyped for this action.
This match is a brawl outside the ring. When it finally gets back to the ring, we get Chris Harris doing a top rope crossbody for a 2 count on Daniels.
Harris looks fantastic in this match. He's tall. He's jacked. He can move.
He's
He
moving,
can connect
yeah.
with the crowd. I remember thinking this guy was going to be a massive single star. And then you think of what, like 7 years later, whenever it was, when he finally got signed by WWE and was Braden Walker on the relaunch of ECW and showed up completely out of shape, couldn't wrestle, didn't connect to the crowd at all. What a fall from grace for a guy that looked like he had a chance to be a real star.
After a distraction by Skipper, they get the heat on James Storm. They're in control for most of the match. Storm teases a couple hot tags, finally ducks a clothesline by Daniels and makes the tag to Harris. Harris runs wild, catches low key, hits a sit-out powerbomb for 2. America's Most Wanted hits a heart attack clothesline, and then AMW hits their top rope leg drop finisher, but low key pulls the referee out of the ring, which is one of my least favorite spots in wrestling.
It's actually my least favorite spot in wrestling. I hate it so much more than even a ref bump, which I despise, because the ref bump, the referee could you could believe that the referee would think, oh, that was accidental, or just be so knocked woozy he doesn't understand. The referee's job, he has a couple jobs in a wrestling match. One is to make sure nothing illegal happens, and to call for disqualification if something does, or do a count out on the floor. But his main job is to count 3. If in the process of doing that, someone pulls him out of the ring, and as he gets pulled out of the ring, he's obviously going to see who does it. There is no scenario where that should not immediately result in a disqualification.
Every time.
I cannot suspend my disbelief to that level to think a trained, licensed referee would not immediately disqualify the wrestler or team who does that.
So here comes this finish. Skipper gets in the ring, hits his finishing move. Daniels crawls over and only gets a 2 count.
Skipper's finishing move, the play of the day, the overdrive, one of the worst finishers in professional wrestling. If you know it, you're seeing it in your mind right now, and you're thinking, how has anyone ever been pinned by that?
Harris puts a sharpshooter on Christopher Daniels. Skipper goes to hit Harris with a chair, but Storm hits a super kick to make the save. The referee doesn't see Christopher Daniels tapping out in the sharpshooter. Harris then gets a visual pin, and then Daniels tries to hit Harris with the belt, with one of the belts, but Harris grabs the belt and hits Daniels. The referee again does not call for disqualification. Instead, he just puts the belt out of the ring.
He sees it happen, takes the belt away from Harris, puts it out of the ring. Meanwhile, as the ref is distracted doing that, low-key grabs the other belt and hits Harris while the referee isn't looking.
And Daniels gets the pin. NWA Tag Team Champions are Triple X in a multi-incompetent ref 3-on-2 chaotic finish that was this had to you got hyped for this match. And you forgot that this was going to happen. This is like you getting hyped for an All Japan 80s match, thinking you're going to get a finish.
Yes. No, I forgot that I was watching TNA Vince Russo. The finish, chaotic was the word. There were so many things happening at the end of this match. I loved the action. I thought Key looked great. Those Mongolian chops that he threw are awesome. Daniels is rock solid. The crowd was with it. Getting the heat didn't drag. The hot tags were great. James Storm was kind of just there. Chris Harris looked awesome. So I was really getting into this by the end. And then as it just got more and more chaotic and unbelievable with the ref incompetence, they lost me at the end. But to this point, this was by far, from an in-ring action standpoint, the best thing on this show.
In the back, Sonny Siaki is beating down D'Lo Brown. So D'Lo Brown's first night in the company, he's been beaten down by multiple people. And here he is being beaten down again by Siaki, and Jeff Jarrett makes the save. So Jarrett's back again. He chases Siaki off into the night.
Because everything revolved around Jeff Jarrett and TNA. And like there's things I like about Jeff Jarrett, but my God, if you lived through particularly someone who was not a WWF, WWE fan and desperately wanted an alternative and tried to get excited about TNA, but there was nothing that happened in the promotion that mattered that didn't involve Jeff Jarrett. No one could look like a star that was a bigger star than Jeff Jarrett. Everyone who could be a bigger star than Jeff Jarrett had to be saved by Jeff Jarrett, as D'Lo Brown was here. This has got to be the 7th or 8th segment, which is pretty much all of them, that we've seen Jeff Jarrett on this show already.
Glenn Gilberti in the ring, and he brings a blonde woman wearing a bikini top. Her name is Hollywood, and they get into the ring. Adam, did you know this woman, Hollywood, she wrestled a match in 2001 for IWA Mid-South?
Wow.
Where Hollywood faced the future Saraya Page from WWE in a bubble bath match. So I had to know, Adam, were you in attendance for this bubble bath match?
That was about 3.5 years before I was going to IWA shows. But are you sure that's not Paige's mom? Because
No,
Paige,
I looked.
How old would she have been at that point?
2001. This was November of 2001. In a bubble bath match. So.
But what I mean, like, I can't even imagine she was old enough to have that match. That's insane to me. Like, so she's 33. That can't be right. She's 33 now. That was 22 years ago. She would have been 11. That is not the former Paige. This is not a situation like Riho starting to wrestle at 9. That has to be her mom who wrestled under the name Sweet Saraya Knight. That has to be it.
All right, maybe that's right. Though we'll see.
There is no way she wrestled. I mean, IWA was weird. I lived it for 5 or 6 years. I saw some crazy stuff, but I cannot believe that Paige wrestled.
I need Cage Match. We need to look up. Is IWA Mid-South on Cage Match? Can we look up this show from 2001?
I will do that here. What's
all right,
the
you
date
do that.
For this?
This is November 24th of 2001.
All right, I'll do this while you recap this great action of Hollywood.
I'll recap this segment as they issue an open challenge. Anyone to face this Hollywood. Lollipop, who's one of the TNA dancers, answers the challenge. They have a horrible catfight. Lollipop's breasts are exposed during this catfight.
What is the date again for this match, by the way? I'm in 2001 now on Cage Match. What's
November 24th.
Okay, November 24th, 2001. November 24th, 2001. IWA Mid-South, eyes wide open.
Yep.
From Charleston, Indiana, as most shows were during that time period. And it just says Hollywood versus Paige. The page is not clickable. If it was, I'm sure it would be, because she did not wrestle under the name Paige until she was in WWE. So I'm pretty sure. Although it is amazing to think of an 11-year-old Paige on a show that also was main evented by Nate Webb versus Too Tough Tony, and had
so a
Roland
different
Hard
Paige.
versus Trent Baker, Chris Hero versus Ian Rotten versus Cash Flow in a 3-way dance that I'm pretty sure was an elimination match for the IWA Mid-South Heavyweight title that I have in my own physical possession to this day. True story. I am the linear IWA Mid-South champion. I own that belt. I have it. I will show it on the camera at some point down the line if the randomizer ever picks an IWA Mid-South show.
So this horrible catfight where breasts were exposed, a top is completely ripped off. Jeremy Borash has to hit the ring and cover Lollipop with his jacket. This was totally planned, which is completely nuts, because you're literally watching this. They couldn't wait to have a woman expose her breasts on this show, and it's crazy because you just see so many kids in the front row of this show.
Oh yes, there's a mother and father in the middle of the front row, like dead center front row, and their expressions don't change. They look so unhappy, but they're not like showing the visible anger, but they're just like, I cannot believe I brought my children into this. It's wild. Like, this is not an ECW arena crowd, even though it's a
No.
somewhat similar building and similar crowd size. This is it's families, it's old people, it's young people, it's everybody in between. It's sort of what you expect out of a wrestling show in the South, crowd-wise.
Don West and Mike Tenay do a rundown of a bunch of things, and then we get the main event. But first, before we can have the main event, Jeff Jarrett has to come out again. He's going to come out and join the broadcast table for this number one contenders match for his title.
Yes, he joins the broadcast table, and we should mention at this point, Fashion Corner, Don West looking resplendent in a gold lame shirt and matching
tie. Love it. I love Don West matching ties. Number one contender for the NWA Championship match. It's AJ Styles versus Raven, who's representing Team Sex.
Raven, Fashion Corner. He looks like he's auditioning to be the third member of the Headbangers. That's kind of the look here, with the skirt or type of bottoms. He's jacked. He's not wearing a shirt. He's got a little bit of face paint on.
Great shape.
He's in incredible shape for Raven. And to me, the thing about this match as we get into it, Raven looks incredible. Like, you're wondering how Raven could keep up with 2003 AJ Styles. Raven is moving. He's going move for move with this dude. This is as motivated of a post 97 Raven that you will ever see, particularly when you think about how bad he looked at the very, very, very end of his WCW run. How unmotivated outside of that one Just Incredible match that we reviewed here on this podcast in a previous episode. We reviewed an ECW on TNN show, how unmotivated he looked. Here he is, he looks like he's going for it all.
Styles goes for the Styles Clash right away to start the match, but Raven bails outside. Styles gets crotched on the barricade, and Raven goes to work. He sends it back in the ring. He hits a drop toe hold, and AJ goes flying out to the floor. Raven follows him out there and has a confrontation with Jeff Jarrett. As Raven continues the beatdown of AJ, he hits AJ with a chair, and I'm like, these refs, my God, these refs are, why are they even here? Just make it no disqualification.
Well, yeah, at this point, just make it like ECW, where none of that matters, and the refs are just here to count pins, and that's basically it.
Back inside, we see AJ is bloody, and then Raven has AJ in the corner. He hits Ivan Koloff's knee from the top that drives the guy down to the mat.
Yes,
a move I did not expect to see in 2003.
A murderer's row of wrestlers, disparate wrestlers who are connected by using this move as a finisher or setup hold, such as Ivan Koloff, York Foundation era Richard Morton, Hiroyoshi Tenzan, and the storied lineage continues here with Raven.
Yeah, unbelievable. AJ fights back, hits the inverted DDT, gets two. AJ with a springboard, but he gets caught in a power bomb by Raven for two. This is where I was really like, wow, Raven is clicking on all cylinders here with AJ.
Yeah, he's got his Scotty Flamingo 1992 WCW light heavyweight division working boots on.
We get a super kick from Styles, a Rana by Styles for another two. Raven's on the outside, and AJ with a slingshot over the tops of the floor, but Raven gets the knees up.
He turns it into a stomach breaker. Think the Dean Malenko toss into the air stomach breaker.
Yes.
That's the position that Raven ends up in as AJ hits the Pescado. Why is nobody bringing this back? This is such a cool spot.
Raven's messing with Jarrett, and Jarrett's had enough. He attacks both Raven and AJ, and Jarrett starts backing away slowly. In the ring, AJ goes off the top with a drop kick, but he doesn't hit Raven. He kills referee Rudy Charles. Raven then hits the even flow DDT, and a new ref comes out to count two. The new ref gets hit by Raven. He's bumped and down. And then we get a Styles clash. Rudy Charles awakens, and he tries to count, but it's only two. Raven kicks out of that.
So this is obviously it's TNA, but to me, a lot of the structure of this match feels like Raven trying to recreate a lot of the crazy twists and turns of his big ECW matches against the likes of Tommy Dreamer or Sandman. Raven is a big finish guy, so you can see he's trying to come up with something here, but I'm sure a lot of it got changed or altered or warped by this being a Vince Russo show.
Yeah, and don't forget all of the BS we saw in the finish for the tag team title match earlier on this show. So the crowd is already numb to these ref bumps and
not even just earlier on in this show. The last actual match, if you don't count the Hollywood Lollipop match and a match, like the last match of any consequence, it was like a half hour ago. People already saw a ridiculous amount of this chaos, and now we're getting it again in almost the exact same way.
So so Raven hits Styles with a chair as Styles hits Raven with a kick at the same time, and both men are down and both are on their back. They both put their arms over each other. They're touching each other so that both refs count 3, and there's all kinds of confusion as Don West is screaming who won. Jarrett's asking who won. Refs were counting for both men being down as the show ends. The show is done.
The show is done. And if you're wondering, like, oh, that sounds familiar, am I just having a weird case of deja vu? It's the exact same thing that they did in the tag title feud or the tag title storyline, which we just saw a video package on minutes earlier. It's the exact same thing.
The finish was the exact same finish that they showed in a clip earlier in the show of the tag title match, which resulted in the titles being held up. And we had a similar finish in the previous match. This was the most TNA way to end a show I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's
people paid for this. People paid money for this.
700 people paid live, and 10 to 15,000 people maybe paid for it on pay-per-view. This is an example of professional wrestling being booked, written, and produced by people who don't understand professional wrestling. And yes, okay, Jeff Jarrett was there. You had all these other guys, but clearly, maybe Russo doesn't deserve all the blame for it, but it feels like he should have said all the hallmarks of a Vince Russo show, even though he wasn't physically on the air for this program. So frustrating because you have a lot of really good wrestlers, and you had some really good action, particularly in the second hour, both in the Raven AJ Styles match and in the tag title match, but it's just completely undermined to such a ridiculous degree by everything else on the show and in those matches working against the actual quality of the in-ring work.
Absolutely. And this can happen in a vacuum. You can have two people have two similar ideas, but there's got to be somebody over the entire show that understands the show as a whole and how insane this would look, and then would understand where we're going and what we're trying to accomplish. And none of those things happen. So this was either all done in a vacuum or all done by someone who doesn't care. And it could have been both.
Well, it's done in a vacuum, done by someone who doesn't care, and also maybe even more so done by someone who actively dislikes wrestling but is working in it. And that is the case with Vince Russo forever. He does not like wrestling at all. So he tries to do all these different things that are different but don't ever actually work. On top of everything else, terrible quality control to have that many things that were that similar on the same show, one after the other.
But they were like, oh, well, no matter the similarities, everyone will just be distracted because, you've got more Jeff Jarrett on the show.
Yes, and wondering when Erik Watts will appear next.
Where's Erik Watts going to be? Oh, my gosh, there was so much Jeff Jarrett. There was so much. D'Lo Brown got beat up a bunch of times in his debut. His promo was horrendous. This show was awful. Before we hit record, before we started this podcast, Adam says, I like this show. It's a good show.
But I kind of liked the show. There were good things on it.
and I said, no, the show is bad. The show is real bad.
The show was not good. I will grant you that. It was largely bad. Grading on the scale of the previous NWA TNA weekly pay-per-views that we watched, which were show 7 and show 8, which were centered around the Dup Cup,
Yes, that's some of the worst stuff in
Ricky
history.
Steamboat being accused of being vaguely racist. And
A-
all
A gun?
these,
There was a gun in one of those?
a gun being pulled out by a little person.
That's right.
By those standards, this was Kawada Masawa 6394.
They've come a long way. They have come a long way.
In the 30 or so episodes, they had come a decent way along. There was there were the Raven AJ Styles match, the in-ring, I really enjoyed. The tag title match up until the chaos at the end. I loved that match up until that point, just as a really well-worked, Southern style, heels get the heat on the baby faces, hot tag comeback. It was really, really fun until the end. But yes, there's all the sports entertainment extreme stuff, all the Glenn Gilberti stuff, the Hollywood stuff. Just it was.
So you've touched on some of your favorite things on this show.
Yes.
I'm going to ask you to narrow down a worst thing on this show.
Well, first I'll just reiterate the best thing on this show, and this is objective. This isn't subjective. Objectively, the best thing on the show was the meeting at the broadcast table between Hacksaw Jim Duggan and Don West.
Yes.
I'm still smiling.
Which again, you
because
can
of that.
see on our social media.
Yes. The worst thing on this show, God, that's I mean, for me, it's just the whole concept and the stupidity of the sports entertainment extreme stable.
So bad.
But like in execution, the worst thing on this show was them doing the tag title storyline as the main event finished right after we saw that video package and then saw all the BS in the actual tag title match. It was too much. It felt like a guy that had one idea and just kept repeating it throughout the show as a booker, which is never a good thing.
That is the correct answer. I think I'll give some honorable mention to that cat fight was unwatchable. I mean, this is just some of the worst of Vince Russo right there. Absolutely horrendous. I would also say way too much Jeff Jarrett. Erik Watts is your main event guy. This is a recipe for disaster.
When you have a stable of second generation wrestlers, and by far the best worker in the group is the former Grandmaster Sexay, who, why was he not in sports entertainment extreme, by the way, if we're going by names and factions. But yeah, anytime you've got those three guys in a stable and they're involved in the main event feud, it's not good.
A show we would never choose to watch, but we will watch it because the randomizer will choose it for us, and we will watch whatever the randomizer chooses every single week for free right here on this feed. So please let your wrestling fan friends know about the show. That your word of mouth, spreading the word, wrestling fans know other wrestling fans, really helps us. It also helps us work the algorithm when you rate, subscribe, comment, all of that stuff on both your podcatcher of choice, but also our YouTube channel that I mentioned, where we have the video version of this podcast up as well. And if you'd like additional bonus content, we also offer that over at our Patreon, patreon.com/wrestlingatrandom, where every single week we do another show, a bonus episode that you cannot hear unless you are a Patreon subscriber. So if you subscribe via Patreon, you can also listen via Spotify. Or if you prefer Apple Podcasts, you can just go in Apple Podcasts right now. You don't even have to go to Patreon. You can just go there, click the subscribe button in Apple Podcasts. It unlocks the entire back catalog of all of our bonus feed content. I think we're almost to 150 shows over there that you'll get for $5 as soon as you sign up. It's absolutely, what a value. You're going to get 150 more episodes of this show.
Yeah, it's the alternate history of this podcast. We're in season 5. You basically have 5 complete additional seasons that you've never heard sitting over in the bonus feed just waiting for you.
If I'm going on a long road trip, I'm going on an airplane, I am signing up for the Patreon. I'm downloading a bunch of episodes, and I'm having a great trip. That's the way to do it. Go over there and check that out. You can also follow the show. The best way to interact with the show is either via YouTube comments, apparently, or via our socials. We're on all the platforms at Wrestle at Random. You can find us on X, Twitter, Threads, Instagram. We're all there. All of the links I described, the entire back catalog of this podcast. It's all evergreen content. So if you're like, wow, season 5, I can't wait for next week's episode, and you just started subscribing, there's 4 other seasons that you can go back and listen to right now that's brand new to you. So start working your way through the back catalog and enjoy some of the other NWA TNA shows we reviewed waiting for you right now in the back catalog of this podcast. Everything I described, all the links, everything's available at the website wrestlingatrandom.com. And with that, we're going to call it a podcast. Adam, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jeremy. I certainly don't feel like I can thank the randomizer for choosing
It does this every once in a while.
It does this every once in a while. It keeps us honest. It makes sure everyone knows how legit, how much of it not being a work, it's a shoot, just to use the lingo that we have on this TNA show. The randomizer is legit, and episodes like this prove it.
Thanks again, everyone, for listening, and we'll talk to you again next time.